In 2019, a shocking story hit the world's attention as the grave of one of the most infamous and horrific Nazis of the Second World War was broken into. Reinhard Heydrich, the Butcher of Prague, was the man responsible for the deaths of thousands of people who were deported to concentration and extermination centres all across occupied lands during World War II. Inside of Czech lands, he ruthlessly put down resistance, and many people were strung up from lampposts in an attempt to strike fear into their hearts, and also to keep the population down. Heydrich was assassinated in 1942, dying of his injuries that he sustained in a bomb attack. However, he was given a huge state funeral, and was interred inside the Invalidenfriedhof, a prominent military cemetery in Berlin. But his grave was broken into, and it's believed that someone was looking for possibly his sword or medals to be taken from the ground or his coffin to sell. But Heydrich's remains were not the only ones who were disturbed, as in 2008, a German industrialist, whose family had profited heavily from the Nazi Empire, had his grave broken into, and his corpse and coffin was stolen. To support, make sure to click subscribe. Friedrich Karl Flick was the youngest son of Friedrich Flick, an industrialist and a convicted Nazi war criminal. He was named after his father, and his father was considered the richest person in West Germany, and one of the richest people in the world. Much of the family wealth was created and established through links to the Third Reich, and during their time in power. Flick donated 50,000 Reichmarks to the Nazi Party in 1932, and following Hitler's seizure of power the year later, Flick increased his financial support to the Nazis, and he contributed a huge sum of roughly 8 million Reichmarks throughout the Third Reich's time in power. He was involved in what was known as the Kepler Circle, the circle of friends of Heinrich Himmler. This was a group of German industrialists who wanted to strengthen the Nazi Party and also industry together, and he also received a number of benefits from his links to the Nazis. Friedrich Flick's business was in coal and steel, and he profited heavily from the turbulent nature of the pre-Second World War economy. But inside of Nazi Germany, Flick's companies used an estimated 48,000 forced labourers. People would be torn from their homes as the German Wehrmacht captured new lands, and they were then sent back to Germany, where they were forced to work long grueling shifts with very little food and water inside Flick's coal mines, steel plants and munition factories. Those working in the munitions industry for Flick were directly arming their enemies, with the Wehrmacht benefiting from this, and the slave labourers experienced very heavy death tolls. It's believed that around 80% of those workers who were under Flick's custody were put to work and died from the poor conditions. Flick was motivated by financial greed and his growing reputation inside the Nazi Party, and at the end of the war he was arrested on the 13th of June 1945 and was then 2 years later brought to trial. One trial, which was held at the Nuremberg's Palace of Justice, even carried his name, and it was found that Friedrich Flick and 5 of his high-ranking directors were responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Flick was not sentenced to death, but instead was sentenced to just 7 years imprisonment, and his time actually spent behind bars was less than this, as he'd been locked up for a number of years already. He was released in August 1950, and he then rebuilt his industrial empire, becoming one of West Germany's richest people. He was also the largest shareholder in the Daimler-Benz company, and at the time of his death he had around 330 companies with 300,000 people working for him. His son Friedrich Karl Flick and grandson were the ones who inherited the wealth and power. Flick got involved in different underhanded deals with the German government throughout the decades, and he allegedly made a $25 million payment to German political parties for favourable treatment and also tax cuts. In 1985, Friedrich Karl Flick sold off the remaining companies that he held, and with this he made around 3 billion German marks, and he spent the rest of his life in Austria, retired. His estimated net worth in 2006 was said to have been 6.1 billion, but it was around this time that the son of the Nazi slave labour driver became very ill. Friedrich Karl Flick died on the 5th of October 2006 inside of his villa in Austria. But this would not be the end of his story. In November 2008, it was reported that his grave had been disturbed, but this was not like the grave of Heydrich that was raided. The coffin and corpse of Friedrich Karl Flick had been taken. He had been laid to rest inside of a large oak coffin, which had been placed inside the family's mausoleum at the cemetery at Veldum am Verhus. When his body was placed in the ground initially, it was said that the coffin weighed over 18 stone and was very, very heavy. The police estimated that the coffin would have taken at least 6 men to disinter the remains and then lift them out of the grave and then take them away. The grave robbery took place a number of days before the discovery, meaning that the body had been hidden and probably concealed somewhere before the family had the chance to realise what had happened. This wasn't the first time that the family had experienced security problems and issues, as Flick hired security throughout his life to guard and protect his family, and his brother and sister-in-law in 1991 were kidnapped, and the kidnappers were paid £3.5 million, but were then captured. The police believe that the grave robbers had struck in an attempt to extort money from the rich family, who benefited greatly from the suffering of others during World War II. So the grave of the son of the Nazi, who had used a huge amount of concentration camp labour, was broken into, and the coffin was removed and then hidden away. But what was not expected was that the body would ever be found, and the coffin was actually located in 2009. The coffin of Flick was found in Budapest, as criminals from Hungary and Romania had been involved in the theft, and the criminals managed to extort roughly £100,000 from the wealthy family. The coffin and body was returned to the mausoleum, and private detectives were the ones who managed to locate it, as the police had drawn blanks. A Hungarian lawyer was also arrested and suspected of being the mastermind behind the plot, and the thieves allegedly demanded €6 million in cash. At the time of his death, Friedrich Flick was the 94th richest person in the world. His family's fortune had been built off the horrors of the Nazi regime and also the crimes of the Second World War. His family's wealth was linked to the concentration camp labourers and the horrific conditions that the workers were forced to deal with, and for this his father would be sentenced as a major war criminal to many years' imprisonment. Flick benefited as a second generation from this, despite the fact he was just a young man and a teenager during the Second World War. His father bequeathed a huge sum of money to the Nazis, and in return gained a lot back from this. He was even rubbing shoulders with Heinrich Himmler at times. But the stolen coffin and corpse of Friedrich Flick is a remarkable story that ended with the coffin being returned to the mausoleum after roughly a year, crossing many different countries and being concealed and hidden. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.